Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Stig Abell about A Twist in the River. I asked Stig before we started recording what to call this, and he and I have agreed on it's a clever mystery, and I like that term, Stig, a lot because I felt as if I grew up in the country and I felt as if I had sort of returned home, even though I didn't grow up in that part of the world.
Yeah. And that's
So
kind of you to say, Dan. Yeah, look, we had the conversation because there's this term in crime writing called cozy crime, and I bet if we trace that back to Patient Zero, it'd be some bored blurb writer somewhere who didn't know quite what to say and was trying to basically convey Agatha Christie and Golden Age and tea and biscuits at the vicarage and all of that, and therefore anything that's not set in a city and does not have multiple murders and drugs and stuff like that is then called cozy. But cozy sounds boring to some people.
I agree.
Look, I think to a certain extent, we all find books cozy in the good sense of it, which is comforting and a place to find rest and repose and all of that. So there's something in it. But I think if you think, oh, I'm not sure I quite like the idea of cozy, then just put it out of your vocabulary because I'm not sure it quite means what it's supposed to mean.
No, and I don't think yours is cozy either. In what I would call what a person who calls themselves a cozy mystery writer.
There's too much nudity in it, Dan. I think to be truly cozy.
I agree. So now I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do at the beginning and say that Stig Abell is an English journalist, a newspaper editor, a radio presenter, and was the managing editor of The Sun newspaper. So well done, Stig, and very young still. I like that.
Well, I don't feel very. I'm not young anymore, Dan. I think once you get past 45, I'm 46. I feel old. I feel ragged and old.
Well, wait till 63, Stig. It gets.
There's
much
no way
more
you're
fun.
63, Dan. There's no way you're 63.
The lighting is perfect. Trust me.
What is your regime? What is your regime?
I a lot of gin and coffee.
We did a thing on the radio about the rise of Korean cosmetics, and apparently one of the things that people now put on their face is snail slime.
Oh, lovely.
Would you do that?
No, I didn't know that, but that's interesting to know. You know, I'm like, well, I guess I could start a snail farm.
You don't need it. You don't need a snail on your face, Dan. Don't worry about that.
Thank you, Stig. I appreciate it. So give the audience an overview about what A Twist in the River is about.
So it's the fourth in a series about a guy called Jake Jackson, but you really don't need to have read the previous three because it sort of stands alone as its own story. He's a guy who left the city after a failed marriage and got given this house in the beautiful English countryside where there's no internet, there's no radio, there's no phone. So it's a chance throughout the books actually for him to escape and to be alone and to sort of try and find self-reliance and the glory of nature. And yet what always happens, not least because he's a character in a crime book, he keeps getting dragged and tugged back into real life. And partially that's a good thing for him because he's started this relationship with a local vet and she's got a daughter. And so real life is pulling him back in that respect. And then as a former cop, he gets brought in to investigate, to help investigate, to be involved when things start going wrong in this beautiful idyllic countryside. And what's happening in this book, Twist in the River is kind of like one of the main characters in the book is this sort of slightly threatening, beautiful, snaking river that goes through the isolated countryside. And a woman is swimming in it one day in a heat wave and disappears. And you can see her phone and you can see her shoes and who knows what's happened to her. Now, it could just be she's drowned, the cold water's killed her, or something else could happen. Well, they're thinking about that. Another body shows up. They think it's her, and it turns out to be a different body. No marks, nothing to suggest any foul play, but another body. And then the question starts to follow when other bodies start appearing. Is something tremendously coincidental happening, or is something sinister happening? And if so, how on earth is there no obvious evidence to point to the perpetrator? And then Jake and the friends he's built up over the way sort of get involved to try and find out what's happened and then who's done it.
So, you know, there's a lot of difference between city life and country life in the fact that I think in city life, there's so many of us that oftentimes we don't get as involved with the neighbors and the people living down the road as you do in country life. And I loved I grew up in the country as a child and have chosen to live in the city as an adult. And I find that disappearing in the city is much easier than it is in the country. And neighbors in a small idyllic situation are often nosy neighbors. But that helps in the long run, I think. Maybe we people who live in the city are too cold. Maybe we should be more in touch with nature. So, do you live in the city now? And did you grow up in the city or did you grow up in the country?
I live in the city now, and I grew up in a kind of nothing town, which was kind of half city, half country. But I'm always
Okay.
intrigued by what you're saying is so interesting and true. But there's a flip side to it. And when I started writing these books, I probably had, at least subconsciously in my mind, there's a great bit in Sherlock Holmes where he and Watson are on a train going to the countryside. And Watson looks out the window and he says, "Look at this beautiful countryside. Look at these charming farms and lovely little roads and twisty copses of trees and stuff like that. How charming." And Holmes turns to him and says, "Actually, even in the darkest corner of the city, there's someone coming very often. There are eyes around, there is light available. Actually, in the center of the countryside, there can be darkness and no one can hear you scream," is more or less what he effectively says. So I think the idea of country living gives you lots of possibilities as a writer, because as you say, there's the community and the sense of people nosing about each other's business, which can be good and also can be claustrophobic. But there's also the fact that when the lights go out, you might be a mile or 2 miles or 10 miles away from anyone who could ever hear that you're in distress. And this book was inspired because I present a radio breakfast program on something called Times Radio, which is the radio station of the London Times. And so I spend my days listening to the news, awful news stories, and sometimes they inspire me to write crime books. But there was a case in this country of a woman who disappeared while swimming. Now, everything else that happens in the book has got nothing to do with that. But she disappeared, and for 3 or 4 days, nobody could find her, even though we live in a tiny island here. And as you say, everyone's eyes are everywhere. And she went missing. And, experts came up and said, oh, we could find her, and they didn't find her. And this tiny village in the middle of England where it happened was suddenly overwhelmed by YouTubers and podcasters and journalists. And they spent sort of 4 or 5 days and they couldn't find her. And eventually they did find the body. But the lesson I took from that we think this world is so small, and it is. And we think that we're on top of each other and life is impossible for things to truly mysterious to happen. And yet it did happen. For 4 days, no one could find this woman. And I think that's the nature of country living a bit, that it's a combination of the very familiar and also the possibility of something very, very strange and surprising happening.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle of this country last summer, there was a drought, and a car that had run off the bridge in 1956 was found with the people in the car.
Amazing.
They had dragged the river repeatedly for months and never found it because it had submerged just deep enough. But once it dried up enough, it rose to the top. Or, the water was finally low enough you could see the top of the car. And, it is true because, we live.
That's a great story, Dan. That's a great beginning of a book, that, isn't it?
I agree. Okay, you can run with it, Stig. You write better than I do.
You're giving me that one, are you, Dan? But no, that's great. That's exactly right, isn't it? That things can just sort of come back to the surface, can't they?
Yes. And I think that's one of the quotes you used from another author. So I love the quotes at the beginning of some of the chapters where you have somebody says something about a river, because the river is definitely a character in this book, and not only in the title, but it also holds secrets. And so my mother was petrified of water. So I have never swam in a river. I've swam in a swimming pool, but never in a river, because I too am worried about what's on the bottom. Will you get hung up in the river?
Yeah. And we just had a heat wave here in England a couple of weeks ago, and it got very hot for May. And very sadly, when that happens, there's always deaths because people jump in the water. Often teenagers jump. We get a lot of problem with teenagers, and they go in old quarries or old reservoirs, or they go in rivers, and they've not been in a river ever in their life, but it's so hot they leap in. And you think cold water is one of the most dangerous things. I was researching it for this book, but the cold water can just shut your system down, and effectively you end up you can't breathe, and therefore the water fills your lungs and you're done. And it's a real threat. And actually, one of the threads in all of this is actually, could it just be, a river is a dangerous place. If you live near a river, it does occasionally happen that people that die in it, which makes solving the crime so difficult. In the end, there is someone committing crimes. And I did come up with a fairly complicated-ish, but sort of a clever-ish method of him disabling the women that didn't leave a mark on them is one of the things that happens in the book.
Well, and I felt so I did not sometimes I can figure out who done it. I do, and I'm very proud of myself when I figure out.
Well done. Yes,
I did not figure it out this time. Once it was pieced together, I'm like, well, of course I could see this and I could see that, but I was not clever enough to discover the answer to your clever mystery, Stig. And I thank you for that, because I like the challenge of not knowing. To me, that's the excitement of reading.
And one of the things you do in the editing process, Dan, is because I think when you're writing, sometimes you almost put in notes for yourself as you're writing without you really realizing it, and you over explain in bits, and in order to convince yourself that you're getting to the right bit and the right bit becomes meaningful. And you then have to take them out because otherwise they become too obvious. I think one of the balancing points is, to me, crime fiction isn't all about plot, because I love rereading crime fiction, and therefore there has to be characters you love, or descriptions you love, or moments of tactile sensation that you love, all of that type of stuff. But the plot's got to work. And I think the challenge often when you're writing the things is to create the scaffolding so you can build it up, and then knowing which bits of the scaffolding you can afford to take away at the end. So it's still standing, but it's not so quite an obvious structure getting all the way to the top.
And I like that as well. And so one of the things that I noticed in this, because I didn't particularly care for Danny at the beginning, but there's a bit of redeeming of Danny towards the end of that character. So here in the US, we have quite a few people who are what I call armchair detectives. They follow true crime religiously. And there are all kinds of groups online that try to solve true crime. Do you have that in England as well?
Yeah, we do. And I think it's a new, the true crime podcasts. And I was very intrigued by that, because I'm glad you thought that about Danny, because I had a sort of same relationship to her as well. She's this YouTuber who comes along to this village and thinks she can solve everything. And she sort of runs around getting in the way and not really caring about anyone's feelings in a desperate bid for attention, which is a common thing of the internet economy, I think. But there's a moment where one of the characters has been around a while with me, sort of looks at her and sort of says, you know what, she just wants someone to love her a bit. She just wants someone to be interested in her as a person, tell her to stop photographing her dinner every time and just sit and enjoy life a little bit. And there's a little bit of that in all of us, isn't there? We've all become a bit show-offy. We all live our lives a bit stretched thin and a bit too obvious online. And so in the end, I felt quite sorry for her, because I think she could be quite, in some respects, quite an annoying character, because I don't think people like that do think about the feelings of, if everything is content, if everything is just a rush for clicks, then you're going to be trampling over people, which I think she does. But no, I think she's more of a character that reminds us of some of the things that we all do a little bit ourselves, possibly.
I agree. And then, of course, she plays a sort of what I considered a pivotal role, especially once we discover who the murderer is. And the murderer is explaining about why she had to be eliminated. Sorry about the spoiler alert, people, because there's more than one death in this book. But I was, so the killer says, she was a little too spot on in some places.
Yeah.
And I sort of thought, well, are you sort of redeeming you being a journalist there, Stig?
Well, the interesting thing is that journalists get a bad reputation for this as well. But journalists look down on YouTubers. Well, really, one of the points I was trying to make is that we're all a bit similar. We all love a ghoulish story.
Yes.
And I think historically, and this will be true in America as in this country, when something horrible happens to a community, it's totally right that journalists go there and try and tell the story of what's happened.
Yes.
So on the one hand, this is all laudable stuff. On the other, if you send 100 strangers into a small community with their trucks and their cameras and their there's no way they're not going to cause damage, because people are grieving and people are sad. And how you balance those two things is really, really difficult, actually, and quite interesting, I think, because you don't want to live in a place where something happens, the police can draw a massive cordon around it and no one knows anything. because horrible things happen when there's that level of restriction. But equally, a free-for-all is a dangerous thing, and I'm quite interested in the ethics of that, I think, in this book.
All right, I like that because I wonder the same things too. Because I've often looked, especially like war torn areas where a photographer goes in and takes photos. And I think, the world needs those photos because we need to realize the realities of war and the consequences of war. But at the same time, that's bearing someone's pain over and over again. I mean, they can never get away from it because it's already happened to them. They're already grieving, but yet here's someone taking a photo of them grieving, and it's, it can never be taken away. Once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. And I think
funnily enough, the first 10 years of my life, I wasn't I'm not really a proper journalist, I don't think anyway, but I wasn't even a putative journalist. I used to handle complaints against journalists when I started work.
Okay.
So I used to have to deal with the ethics of journalism for the first 10 years of my career. So a lot of that is exactly what you've said very eloquently there, this issue of the tension between telling a story and respecting the rights of people, the rights of freedom of expression versus the rights of privacy, how you tell a story about families in grief without upsetting them. Also recognizing that sometimes in grief, families want to talk to the press, because actually some people feel a catharsis of going to a journalist and saying, this is what happened to my son or my daughter. And there's no obvious one rule. You can't simply say never do it. You can't say always do it. And actually, I think America is probably more inclined on the side of freedom than we do. In America, I'm always very struck by the fact you don't have contempt of court in the same way. So, a sheriff can arrest someone and say he definitely did it. Whereas as soon as someone's arrested in Britain, no one can talk about it until the end of the trial. Because they don't want to prejudice a jury. So there's a thing, we have a contempt of court act. So as soon as an arrest takes place, but particularly as soon as a charge takes place, you're massively restricted as a journalist on what you can say, because we don't want to say anything that might prejudice a juror. Well, in America, you think we can trust jurors. And so you have the law enforcement guys coming out straight away and saying, yeah, they definitely did it.
Yeah, precisely. And I also think that we started our journalism career here very similar to England, but I think we've gone far astray because the news clicks are too important to the broadcast networks and to the news outlets or news entertainment outlets, whatever you want to call them. And so, but also this book, A Twist in the River, also is a great deal of a love story among a lot of the characters. And is that important to you as an author to weave love in with mystery?
So important. I love it. I'm a soppy old romantic, Dan, in lots of respects. I also I like to feel invested in people. And in the 20s, they used to write rules for detective fiction. And there used to be crazy rules from people saying what you can and can't do. The policeman can never have done it. And I remember one of the rules, because it was a very different time, is you can't have any Chinese people in a detective story and things like that. But one of the rules that people wrote in the 20s was that the detective should never fall in love. And I fundamentally disagree with that. I think of the great detectives like Peter Wimsey, who falls in love, the Dorothy Sayers books. I find in my book particularly, so Jake knows this vet, Livia, and he meets her in the first book. And by the time we get to this book, she's pregnant and they're sort of forming what they want their family to be. And actually, I find the idea of writing about human connection and the desire to be with someone, I find it really, really important. I guess what it comes down to, Dan, is there's a certain type of detective fiction that is purely cerebral, the puzzle, the clicking together of the puzzle. Right. And the people who do that brilliantly, it's magnificent. I'm not that sort of detective writer. I like the mess of human life and emotion. And so to me, what happens with Jake and Livia is very important. It's a very important part of that. And actually, funnily enough, when I get emails from people, or when I go to events, I go to festivals, or I go to book signings and meet readers, almost the first thing they say to me is, I really like Jake and Livia. I really want them to stay. God, don't ever let anything terrible happen to them.
And I find that a lot of readers do get invested with the characters, and we want to know a bit about them. I think, I agree with you. If someone writes the perfect puzzle mystery, maybe they don't need a love interest. But I think the rest of us, live in a world where there's love interest available, perhaps. We came from parents, so there was love somewhere along the line for someone, So it's one of those things that I think I get much more invested in them. And of course, when you heighten the tension for Livia in this book, of course, you got us turning the pages, Stig, so you really accomplished what you set out to do.
Yeah, and because she's pregnant and there's possibly a dangerous person floating about the place, it becomes a bit perilous for her. Also, this is a terribly authorish thing to say, and I won't try and say it too strongly because people will think what a terrible ponce and poser I am. So all characters clearly come from my mind, so I'm not pretending that they live in this world where I'm merely observing them. However, when you create a character a bit, you have a slightly odd relationship with it, where you're slightly looking at them, even though you're writing them yourself. So you sort of give them a bit of a life and then see where they go with it. And I think one of my sins as an author, a little bit, and my publishers are always saying this to me, Dan, like, you need to make more bad stuff happen. Why? Because I've fallen in love with her, Livia particularly, but her and Jake and a couple of other characters. There's my favorite character in the whole series is a woman called Martha, she's had her legs blown off. She's a former spy, and now she helps Jake from her wheelchair, smoking lots of weed to deaden the pain. And I stumbled into her in the second book as just a bit character, and just totally fell in love with the idea of her and her friendship. And her friendship with Jake's very important in this book, and it was really the key to them solving the mystery. So I think, with characters, you've got to let them live a little bit, and then see how much you like them when they've had a chance to live.
And I love Martha as well. Because it's funny, I have a good friend that is, when we say goodbye at the end of a conversation, she clicks off instantly.
Yeah.
You could say, oh my gosh, she's a serial killer. She'd never hear it, because the minute the conversation is over, she hits the end button. I'm a little slower than that, just because I'm like usually driving when we're chatting, and it might take me a minute to find the end button, but I always know that that's her signature. So when Martha bleeps off or bleeps on, I'm like, oh, that's my friend as well, right there.
Yeah. And she doesn't care about anyone. She says what she thinks. She's very caustic in quite a charming way, but also underlying it all, because of what's happened to her, she's a bit lonely and a bit vulnerable, but doesn't want anyone to see it. And her friends can see it, but they don't want to mention it because it would upset her. But also, she's kind of in many ways the key to, whenever I do these mysteries, really, she's often the key to them, Martha.
Well, and she's like a den mother in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
She tries to keep everybody at bay, yet you can tell underneath she's very loving.
Yeah,
she's
she would do anything.
Loyal.
She would do anything to help them out. Although in this book, I won't spoil it because that really does reveal she does take a liberty with Jake in order to solve the crime, which is, I think, entirely justified. I think she's right to do it. But
yes. And sometimes in life, we have to make those decisions.
You're exactly right. Exactly right.
And at the end of the day, no one is hurt.
No,
but at the same time, somebody's got to make the decision, and she makes the decision. So I love that.
No, bless her. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Stig, this book was so wonderful. It's called A Twist in the River. I enjoyed it so very much.
I'm so glad. Thanks for reading it, Dan, because I absolutely had a massive blast writing it. I've really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed writing it. I love speaking to people who've read it. It's very kind to come to your show to talk to you about it.
And are you working on the next one? Is it?
Well, let me tell you, Dan. One of my many sins is I'm a very fast writer because I love doing it so much. So the fifth one is called The Wild Ruins, and is completely finished and has been edited. And in that one, Jake and Livia have been asked. She's very pregnant in this point, Livia. So I thought, what will happen as she gets more and more pregnant? Jake and Livia might have to take things a bit easier. So a person in the village has said to them, they have a relative from the Victorian period who died, a woman called Mabel, a fallen woman. And they want to know whether her reputation and her death was as bad as it seemed, or was there something actually else going on? Was she murdered? Did she kill herself? Was her reputation as black as the family painted her? So what I've ended up in The Wild Ruins is half of it, or more than half of it, is the ultimate cold case. They're trying to work out a Victorian crime. Did it happen or not? And at the same time, one of Jake's ex-colleagues, who's gone rogue as a policewoman, is being chased by police and coming after Jake. So in the present day, there's a degree of jeopardy, but they're spending a lot of their time working about what's happened in the Victorian past.
Well, I'm looking forward to that one as well. So I
Yeah.
hope it's published soon. However, A Twist in the River is out now. It is so magnificent. Don't skip this one while waiting on the next one.
You're a great man, Dan. I'm ever so grateful to you. Lovely to speak to you.
Lovely talking to you too, Stig.